Welcome to another episode of Elevated Minis. My name is Cody, and in this video we're going to make a Yellowstone-inspired prismatic hot spring that can be used in any number of your tabletop games. Hope you guys enjoy it. And to kick things off, you're going to want to draw a random shape on a base. In my case, I'm using an 8.5 by 11 piece of chipboard, but if I were to do things a little bit different, I probably would have wanted to use a piece of MDF, mainly because of the warping that can happen from all the clay and modeling compound I use later, but I'll show you what I did to counter that. Next, I used a piece of scrap foam and cut around the edges at about a 30-degree angle on the sides with an Olfa blade. The reason I like these blades is because you can adjust the length of them, and they're super sharp, and it's great for when you're trying to cut angles like this. I had to adjust as I went along until I got a shape I was happy with. Then I took a smaller hobby knife and did the same as I did on the outside, only going the opposite direction to create the pool. So just be careful with the blade. Just peel away the foam here, and you'll see that I have a nice start to the spring. And next I used some tacky glue to glue it down to where I wanted. And I also had a couple foam pieces left over from all the carving, and I decided to put them around the edge just to give some difference in texture for the other springs. So that's what you see me doing here. And so to create the other springs, I used DAS, an air drying modeling clay. Never used this stuff before, but I learned about it from Mel, the terrain tutor, along with many other things from him. So check out his channel if you haven't before. But when you use this stuff, it's important to make sure the surface is a little damp that you're working on. And again, it would have been better to use MDF for this, but we're going with it anyway. The clay works best when you use water to smooth it out and have it adhere to the surface. You really need to mess with it yourself to get a feel for it. If you guys are new here and like what I'm doing, it would be extremely helpful if you hit that subscribe and like button, as well as the bell notification so you know whenever I release a new video. With that out of the way, I knew I wanted to create 3 springs instead of one giant spring to give it an interesting look, so I rolled out some ropes and placed them where I thought it would look good. You could make more or less if you wanted to, depending on what you were going for. As I mentioned earlier, I knew I'd have to counter the warping that can happen when you're using water on something like chipboard, so all I did was tape down the edges, and it was enough to keep it nice and flat throughout the rest of the project. So after the clay had about 24 hours to dry, I wanted to build out the texture of the springs by using something else that I've never used before, and that's sculptamold. But you want to mix this stuff into a cottage cheese-like consistency, and that works out to about a 2-to-1 ratio of sculptamold to water, and you want to make sure you mix it for a good solid minute or so to make sure that it's all well mixed. And just like the clay, spread it out with your fingers to get a shape you're happy with. All this stuff you see me using, I'll have some affiliate links for you down in the description below, and that just means that I'll make a small percentage of the sale if you buy something using those links. It's just a small way that you can help out this channel. I knew I wanted to do a terrain tutorial this time around because I wanted to emphasize that my channel is more than just painting miniatures and techniques, although that is a big part of it. I just like to make things, and that's really what it's about. I was looking for some inspiration, and I came across the Prismatic hot spring in Yellowstone National Park, and I instantly knew I wanted to try to make something similar. I loved all the colors and the fact that it would give me a chance to try some new techniques that I've been wanting to try, like resin, air drying clay, and the sculptamold. So I hope you guys like this. After about 25 minutes, I was able to smooth out the sculptamold a bit and start carving some textures into the sides of the springs, like some water had flowed out from the center and caused a bit of erosion. I just used some cheap clay sculpting tools, but you could probably use a toothpick if you wanted to achieve a similar result. The key here is just to be random. I'm just using kind of like the flat edge of the sculpting tool a bit here, just kind of widen out where the erosion was. I just wanted to make sure it came through with all the dry brushing that would be happening later. And next, I was just doing some more texturing. I don't know what the technical name is for this tool that I'm using, but it's got these little wires that poke out the end of it, and just you could do the same thing with a toothpick. It's just more texture and interest going on. So after letting the sculptamold finish curing for an entire day, I started adding some texture with some pebbles and fine sand that I picked up from the dollar store. If you don't know, the dollar store is any crafter's friend. You can find all kinds of stuff in there for your terrain. I just glued all these pebbles in random places. You could do more or less. Just have fun with it and don't think about it too hard, and you'll get a nice looking result. And moving on to even more texture, I think you're starting to sense a theme here. It's all about the texture to create a nice piece of terrain, but I'm using a Grelin Earth. It's a technical paint from Games Workshop. I don't recommend using this on a project like this simply because it's a fairly large project and it's pretty expensive for the amount of product you actually get. I honestly just wanted to get rid of it, and I'm not sure if I'll actually buy it again. But I recommend using some sand mixed with some PVA to create some interest along the edges of those flow lines. My hopes by using this stuff was to have some crackling along the edges, but I think the sculptamold absorbed this stuff a bit, and the crackling was hardly noticeable in the end. And there we go. Done. I'm kidding, of course, but you can see where I put all the Grelin Earth. It was probably about half of a pot that I threw on there, so yeah, don't do what I did. Go with sand and PVA for the textures. And but to make matters worse, I also decided to use all of the sterling mud I had in various patches as well, so judge me as you will. I gotta give credit where credit is due, so here I'm using a mixture of black paint and Mod Podge that I learned from Black Magic Craft, and if you haven't seen his stuff, go check him out. So he's got a great channel for terrain crafting, all kinds of great tips and advice, and I've learned a lot from him, so yeah, go check him out. But the Mod Podge seals everything in, and the black just unifies everything for when we go to paint it later. And after the Mod Podge is all dry, it's time to move on to my favorite part of the project, and that's the painting. I started using Imperial Blue for the very center of all the springs, and try to ignore that glare in the middle there. It's just my camera and table lighting that I didn't notice until after I filmed the whole thing. And next I'm using a 50-50 mix of Imperial Blue and Turquoise. I'm using a swirling motion with the brush, and this kind of simulates a little movement in the water, and it really helps blend the transitions between all of the colors. And moving into straight turquoise here, again with that swirling motion, just to create that movement. And now with turquoise and foul green. You'll see me do this with every time I want to go into a new color. I always use the previous color to mix into the next one, and it really creates this neat effect on this. I was really happy with how this turned out. I'm not sure why I didn't capture it on video, but at the very top of the springs there, I used pale yellow just for the final highlight. to bring out some of the details and all of the sculpting I did earlier, I used Army Painter Quickshade with Strong Tone, and I just didn't want to get it inside the pools themselves because I really liked the blue and I didn't want to dirty them up, and I really wanted that to come out later, so I just avoided that and just stuck around the edges. Just wanted to bring out these details a bit, so I just did a dry brush using Bonewhite. And we're finally finished with all the painting, and we're moving on to the resin. I had never done this before. I had only seen YouTube videos on how to do it, and I had no idea if this resin was going to work. This is a 2-part resin where you mix equal parts of the base resin and a catalyst for 3 minutes. I probably mixed it for 5 before I added a couple of drops of blue game ink to give it a slight blue hue. My thought was that it would slightly intensify the blue paint job. I poured it in and crossed my fingers. And to get rid of the bubbles, I used a lighter and went over the surface with it. It instantly got rid of the bubbles, and you can see just how shiny this is because you can see the light above the table that I'm working on. After a day went by, I breathed a sigh of relief because everything came out exactly as I wanted. All I had left to do was cut around the edges and bevel them out with a hobby knife. I finished off the edges by painting them with Charred Brown, and I was really happy with the end result of this project. I hope you guys give this a shot. Send me a picture of how it turned out for you. Let me know in the comments down below what you think and maybe what you would have done differently or better. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me through this project. If you could help me out by hitting that like, subscribe, and bell button, that would be awesome. Until next time, thanks again.